On February 14, 1943, at an altitude of approximately 18,000 feet over the Solomon Islands near Bougainville, Japanese naval aviators encountered an American fighter aircraft that would soon redefine aerial dominance in the Pacific theater. The aircraft, painted in dark blue and characterized by its inverted gull wings, demonstrated flight performance far beyond what the Japanese pilots had anticipated. It climbed steadily, surpassing 20,000 feet, then 22,000 feet, maintaining excess engine power, while the Mitsubishi A6M-0, the Imperial Japanese Navy's premier fighter, approached the limits of its operational ceiling. This was the F4U Corsair of the U.S. Marine Corps, an aircraft that would soon earn the ominous nickname Whistling Death due to the distinct sound generated by its wing root oil coolers during dives. Within the span of the next year and a half, the Corsair would establish a psychological edge over Japan's naval aviators, undermining the confidence of a corps long considered elite. Its superior speed, climb rate, and firepower forced even the most seasoned Japanese pilots to confront a tactical reality for which their training had offered no precedent. The initial encounter over Bougainville was not merely another skirmish in the ongoing air war. It signaled the start of a systematic shift in aerial warfare, transforming highly skilled Japanese aviators from aggressors into cautious, often reluctant opponents when faced with the Corsair's distinctive silhouette. To grasp the full impact of the Corsair's arrival, it is necessary to understand the exceptional skill level of Japanese naval pilots in early 1943. Graduates of the Yokorin Naval Aviator Preparatory Program represented less than 2% of all applicants. Those selected endured a rigorous 3-year training course during which attrition rates exceeded American losses in numerous Pacific engagements. By this period, the typical carrier-based Japanese pilot had accumulated over 800 hours of flight experience, while veterans from the China campaign often exceeded 2,000 hours. These aviators had proven their effectiveness in a series of campaigns, from the attack on Pearl Harbor to operations across Burma, the Gilberts, and beyond, consistently demonstrating the lethal capabilities of the Zero fighter. In combat against Allied aircraft during 1942, the Zero achieved an extraordinary kill ratio of approximately 12-to-1, showcasing superior maneuverability, extended operational range, and exceptional visibility. Japanese air doctrine emphasized maximizing these advantages through energy-based tactics and precise aggressive maneuvering, complemented by the spiritual ethos of Bushido, which instilled the belief that courage and skill could offset material limitations. Against Chinese forces, British Hurricanes, and early American fighters such as the P-40 and F-4F, this philosophy had repeatedly proven successful, reinforcing the confidence of Japanese aviators in their techniques. When Marine Fighting Squadron 124, VMF-124, deployed the first dozen F4U Corsairs to Guadalcanal on February 12, 1943, Japanese reconnaissance quickly identified the aircraft by its unusual appearance: long fuselage, massive four-bladed propeller, and the inverted gull wing configuration. While initially assessed by Japanese intelligence as another incremental improvement in American aviation, the Corsair would soon demonstrate capabilities that rendered previous assumptions about air superiority obsolete. Its combination of speed, climb performance, and firepower effectively challenged the tactical doctrines of Japan's most experienced pilots, marking a turning point in the air war over the Solomon Islands and ultimately throughout the Pacific theater. The first operational engagement between the F4U Corsair and Japanese aircraft occurred on February 14, 1943, coinciding with Valentine's Day, when Corsairs provided fighter cover for PB-4Y-1 Liberator bombers targeting the Kahili airfield on Bougainville. This confrontation, later labeled by some as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, resulted in significant initial losses for the Americans. 9 aircraft were destroyed, while only a single Japanese plane was lost. Despite the unfavorable tally, the battle provided critical insight into the capabilities of the Corsair, fundamentally reshaping the understanding of aerial combat for Japanese pilots. Unlike American fighters that engaged in tight, turning dogfights, the Corsair employed tactics that leveraged its superior performance. Pilots would climb sharply above enemy aircraft before diving at high velocity to strike, then use its exceptional speed to disengage before the Zeros could react. After the attack, Corsairs could zoom climb back to altitude, remaining largely untouchable. Over time, Japanese intelligence began to compile detailed specifications on the F4U-1, which exposed a dramatic imbalance in capability between the two forces. At the heart of the Corsair's performance was its Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, delivering 2,000 horsepower under normal takeoff conditions and reaching up to 2,250 horsepower using water injection in combat. By comparison, the Zero's Nakajima Sakai A21 engine produced only 1,130 horsepower at takeoff, highlighting the Corsair's immense power advantage. This difference extended beyond raw numbers. It represented a fundamental leap in fighter design. Speed disparities were especially pronounced. The F4U-1 could achieve a maximum velocity of 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet, whereas the Zero Model 52, the latest Japanese variant in 1943, was limited to 351 miles per hour. In a dive, the Corsair routinely exceeded 500 miles per hour while maintaining structural integrity and control, while the Zero faced aerodynamic flutter at around 360 miles per hour and risked structural failure above 410 miles per hour. Climb performance further emphasized the Corsair's superiority. The aircraft could reach 20,000 feet in 7.7 minutes, climbing at 2,890 feet per minute under standard conditions and up to 3,210 feet per minute using war emergency power. In contrast, the Zero required nearly 11 minutes to attain the same altitude. At heights above 25,000 feet, where the Corsair remained agile and responsive, the Zero became lethargic and increasingly difficult to control. The American fighter's service ceiling of 36,900 feet represented a near insurmountable threshold for Japanese aircraft, which struggled to operate effectively above 33,000 feet. Armament differences added another layer of tactical advantage. Each Corsair carried 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, firing 850 rounds per minute with a muzzle velocity of 2,840 feet per second, delivering a combined 69 pounds of projectiles per second. The Zero, by contrast, mounted only 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, collectively producing around 13 pounds of fire per second, with the cannons limited to 60 rounds each, just enough for 7 seconds of continuous firing. The durability of the Corsair also shifted combat dynamics. Its cockpit was protected with 155 pounds of armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and armored oil coolers. Japanese cannon fire that would obliterate a Zero often only punctured the Corsair, allowing it to return to base with hundreds of bullet holes. This resilience enabled American pilots to adopt aggressive, even high-risk tactics, secure in the knowledge that their aircraft could withstand errors or enemy hits. Japanese pilots, operating in lightweight fighters optimized purely for maneuverability, had no such margin for mistakes. A single error could be fatal. The Zero's legendary agility came at the expense of protection. Minimal structural reinforcement, unarmored cockpits, and non-self-sealing fuel tanks allowed for extreme maneuverability but left pilots and aircraft highly vulnerable. The F4U demonstrated that American engineering could integrate heavy armor and still maintain exceptional performance. In effect, the United States had developed a fighter that combined speed, firepower, and survivability in a way the Japanese could not match. Over subsequent months, bases in the Southwest Pacific, particularly Rabaul, became arenas where Corsairs systematically degraded Japanese naval aviation. The aircraft's combination of raw performance, armament, and protection decisively altered the balance in the air, marking a turning point in the Pacific theater of operations. By late 1943, Japan concentrated its most elite fighter units at its principal base outside the home islands, attempting to halt the American advance in the Pacific. When Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington and his VMF 214 Black Sheep Squadron arrived in October 1943 with their F4U 1A Corsairs, the strategic and psychological balance had already shifted against the Japanese. By December 17, 1943, Boyington led 31 Corsairs on a mission to provide escort cover for a bombing attack on Rabaul. In response, 40 Japanese Zero fighters were scrambled to intercept the Americans' most experienced aviators. The Corsairs quickly exploited their performance advantages. Climbing to altitudes near 25,000 feet, they operated in regions where Zeros struggled to maneuver. Japanese pilots attempting to engage were forced into untenable positions, while the Americans executed high-speed dives approaching 450 miles per hour, delivered precise bursts of fire, and regained altitude safely. In this encounter, Japanese forces lost 11 aircraft, while the Corsairs suffered only 2 damaged planes. Beyond raw performance, the Corsair introduced a unique psychological element. The aircraft's wing-mounted oil cooler intakes produced a piercing whistle during steep dives, a sound that reportedly haunted Japanese pilots even in sleep. The Corsair's physical appearance reinforced this effect. The inverted gull wings created a menacing silhouette. The enormous 13-foot 4-inch propeller added to the plane's aggressive look, and the dark blue paint rendered it nearly invisible against the sea from above. American pilots intentionally amplified these psychological effects, executing diving passes without firing merely to spread fear. VMF 214 enhanced the predatory imagery by painting shark mouths on their planes, further unsettling enemy crews. By mid-1943, Japan faced an alarming dilemma. The introduction of the Corsair and other advanced U.S. fighters was rapidly decimating experienced Japanese pilots faster than they could be replaced. Before the war, Japanese naval aviators received 500 to 700 hours of flight instruction before entering combat. By 1943, shortages of fuel and training aircraft had reduced this to roughly 150 hours, and by 1945, new pilots often had as little as 40 to 60 hours. These inadequately trained aviators were barely capable of safely operating their aircraft, let alone surviving encounters with Corsairs. For veteran Japanese pilots, the situation was demoralizing. They were forced to operate alongside novices who stood little chance against the superior American fighters, witnessing them perish while attempting to provide protection. The traditional mentorship model of Japanese naval aviation disintegrated under the relentless attrition, leaving even experienced flyers confronting an unrelenting technological and tactical disparity. Those who faced the Corsair early in 1943 accurately predicted the devastation when American carrier aviation deployed the next generation of high-performance fighters. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the F-6F Hellcat, sharing the Corsair's engine and comparable performance, validated these predictions during what American pilots termed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese losses totaled approximately 400 to 450 aircraft, while U.S. forces lost around 130. Many Japanese airmen were destroyed before even identifying their attackers, unable to reach or evade the faster, more heavily armed American fighters. First-hand accounts from American Corsair pilots revealed the depth of the psychological transformation in air combat. VMF 124's First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh became the first Corsair ace on May 13, 1943, recording 21 victories in 6 months. He later reflected that the Corsair's performance made aerial combat virtually one-sided. Superior speed, climb rate, dive capability, firepower, and armor rendered engagements highly mechanical. Similarly, Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 destroyed 20 Japanese aircraft in just 17 days between January 14th and 30th, 1944, exploiting the Corsair's strengths to such effect that Japanese formations would disperse upon sighting the approaching fighter. As 1943 gave way to 1944, successive Corsair variants widened the performance gap. The F4U-1A incorporated a bubble canopy for enhanced visibility, water injection for increased combat power, and additional armor. The F4U-1D could carry up to 4,000 pounds of ordnance, exceeding the payload of many Japanese bombers, while maintaining performance superior to any Japanese fighter. Attempts by the Japanese to respond technologically often backfired. The Zero Model 52 added armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, but became too heavy to maintain its agility, while the Kanawashi N1K George, though promising, was plagued by engine unreliability and hydraulic failures. Further intensifying the psychological impact, the 1944 introduction of the F4U-2 Night Fighter Corsair brought airborne radar into combat, enabling 36 specialized aircraft to hunt Japanese pilots under the cover of darkness, a domain previously regarded as safe. Being pursued invisibly at night shattered the remaining confidence of Japanese naval aviators. By late 1944, the combined effects of superior aircraft, eroded pilot training, and relentless attrition led to the adoption of kamikaze tactics, marking the culmination of Japan's psychological and operational defeat in the air. By the latter part of World War II, Japanese fighter pilots had shifted from pursuing victory in the air to seeking purposeful deaths in combat, a transformation that reflected the stark reality of technological inferiority. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, who would later be recognized as the architect of Japan's kamikaze program, candidly acknowledged that the motivation behind suicide missions stemmed from the inability to win conventional aerial engagements. By the autumn of 1944, Japanese aviators were facing an exchange ratio that heavily favored American aircraft, with statistics suggesting up to 15 Japanese planes lost for every American fighter downed. Confronted with such overwhelming odds, Japanese pilots increasingly chose missions that offered at least symbolic or strategic impact, rather than engaging in futile dogfights against superior machines. American fighter planes, particularly the Vought F4U Corsair, were at the forefront of this technological advantage. Pilots such as Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington exemplified the lethal effectiveness of these aircraft, scoring 22 of his 26 aerial victories over just 84 days while flying Corsairs. These achievements were not merely the result of individual skill, but the product of a highly advanced aircraft that redefined air combat dynamics. Japanese combat doctrine, which had traditionally emphasized personal skill and maneuvering, became increasingly irrelevant in the face of machines that outclassed their pilots in speed, firepower, and survivability. The industrial capacity of the United States was a decisive factor in this imbalance. During the war, 12,571 Corsairs were produced, surpassing Japan's entire fighter output from 1942 to 1945. Each aircraft was a testament to American manufacturing capabilities, incorporating 13,000 pounds of aluminum, 1,000 pounds of steel, 18 miles of electrical wiring, and over 2,000 individual instruments and control mechanisms. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine, with its 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows and advanced supercharging, demonstrated a level of engineering precision that Japanese factories could not replicate, even if they had obtained the technology. In addition to superior aircraft, the United States trained its aviators on a scale and intensity that Japan could not match. The U.S. Navy produced some 60,000 pilots over the course of the war, each accumulating roughly 600 hours of flight time, including 200 hours in advanced fighter aircraft. American pilots entered combat having practiced extensively with live ammunition, studied gun camera footage, analyzed after-action reports, and adapted to evolving tactics continuously. In contrast, Japanese training programs had collapsed under wartime pressures. Many new pilots took to the skies with less than 100 hours of flight experience, often without any practical weapons training, high-altitude flying experience, or exposure to high-speed dives. The Corsair's evolution into a fighter-bomber further intensified the threat to Japanese forces. Equipped to carry bombs, rockets, and napalm, these aircraft could strike airfields, shipping, and infrastructure with impunity. Their versatility allowed them to operate across a wide range of missions, introducing uncertainty and fear wherever they appeared. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most decorated surviving aces with 64 confirmed kills, later reflected on the psychological impact of facing the Corsair. He noted that the realization of defeat often came not through a single encounter, but by observing the scale at which the United States could produce such advanced aircraft, while Japan struggled even to maintain older models. Survival against these fighters frequently meant avoiding engagement entirely. Japanese pilots, upon sighting the Corsair's distinctive bent wings, would often descend to low altitude, seek cloud cover, or retreat, not out of cowardice, but from an acute awareness of the lethal disparity in technology. By early 1945, the numerical data underscored a near-total collapse of Japanese air power. Corsairs alone claimed over 2,140 victories while losing only 189 aircraft in air combat, yielding a staggering 11-to-1 kill ratio. These figures, however, underrepresented the broader psychological toll. Many Japanese aircraft failed to engage altogether, while others were destroyed on the ground by strafing runs. Pilots increasingly refused to take off when reports indicated the presence of Corsairs. Production statistics delivered a further blow. In 1945, the United States manufactured 7,829 fighters of all types, compared with Japan's 1,140 aircraft, many of which were outdated and inferior even to earlier 1942 designs. The Corsair's output alone exceeded the entirety of Japan's aviation production. The dominance of American aircraft like the Corsair fundamentally undermined core tenets of Japanese military culture. The concept of Yamato Damashi, or the indomitable spirit of the Japanese warrior, which had historically emphasized courage and skill over material constraints, proved insufficient against overwhelming technological superiority. Individual ability, once central to aerial combat, became largely irrelevant in a war dominated by machines whose performance far exceeded the capabilities of even the most experienced Japanese pilots. In essence, the aircraft had become the decisive factor, not the man. By the final stages of the Pacific War, Japanese fighter pilots, regardless of experience or the impeccable maintenance of their Mitsubishi Zeros, were increasingly incapable of matching American aviators flying F4U Corsairs. The arrival of these advanced aircraft undermined the foundational principles of Japanese pilot training, which had emphasized individual skill and aerial duels. The Battle of Okinawa, fought from April to June 1945, highlighted the full extent of this imbalance. From escort carriers and captured airfields, Marine and Navy Corsairs established near-total control of the skies over the Ryukyu Islands.
Operational data from Okinawa underscore the Corsair's overwhelming dominance. During this campaign, Corsairs conducted over 15,000 combat sorties, claiming more than 500 enemy aircraft while delivering thousands of tons of ordnance on land and sea targets. Japanese airmen, many with less than 30 hours of flight experience, faced a relentless attrition. Survivors recounted that engagements often concluded within moments, frequently without them even being able to aim their weapons at the far faster and better armed Corsairs. As Japan braced for a potential invasion of its home islands, strategic calculations revealed the scale of the threat. American planners could potentially deploy upwards of 5,000 Corsairs, using a combination of carrier-based squadrons and captured airfields. In contrast, Japanese forces could assemble perhaps 2,000 operational aircraft of all types, most of them obsolete, piloted by trainees with minimal instruction. Admiral Soemu Toyota, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, later acknowledged that conventional air combat was no longer feasible. The only viable option remaining was to conceal aircraft and launch them in kamikaze missions. The technological and operational supremacy of the Corsair had rendered traditional Japanese fighter doctrine obsolete. The conclusion of hostilities in August 1945 spared the remnants of Japanese aviation from total destruction. Operation Olympic, the planned invasion of Kyushu, had been designed to employ over 2,000 Corsairs, operating from a network of 48 carriers and multiple captured airfields. Japanese survivors expressed profound relief at not facing this onslaught, which would have amounted to complete annihilation rather than combat in any meaningful sense. In the immediate post-war period, American occupation authorities facilitated visits for Japanese military leaders to U.S. aircraft production facilities. Observing the Vought factory in Connecticut, which continued Corsair production, the Japanese officers finally grasped the vast scale of American industrial capacity. Individual plants produced more aircraft engines than the entirety of Japan, and single states within the U.S. generated more aluminum than the Japanese Empire as a whole. These visits clarified why Japanese aviators, trained to excel in individual dogfights, had been so thoroughly outmatched. They were confronting mass-produced machines supported by an industrial infrastructure Japan could never approach. A review of Corsair operations over the course of the Pacific War illustrates the aircraft's decisive role. A total of 12,571 Corsairs were built, achieving 2,140 confirmed aerial victories, while sustaining only 189 losses. This represents a kill ratio of approximately 11-to-1. The fleet conducted over 64,000 missions, delivering more than 15,600 tons of bombs. In terms of performance, the Corsair outpaced the Zero by 66 miles per hour in level flight, climbed over 1,000 feet per minute faster, dove at speeds exceeding 140 miles per hour more than its opponent, and operated at ceilings nearly 4,000 feet higher. Its armament carried more than 5 times the destructive potential of the Japanese fighter. At peak production, American factories were turning out 418 Corsairs per month, while Japan managed just 250 fighters of all types. American pilots typically received 600 hours of training, in contrast to the 40 to 60 hours available to Japanese trainees in 1945. Post-war analysis of captured Corsairs by Japanese engineers provided critical insights into the technological gap. Every subsystem, from hydraulics to avionics, metallurgy, and production methods, demonstrated advances previously inconceivable to Japan. The knowledge gleaned from these aircraft directly influenced Japan's post-war aerospace programs, guiding the design of new fighter and civilian aircraft for decades. American pilots, reflecting on their wartime experience, often reported mixed feelings about their overwhelming advantage. By 1945, encounters with inadequately trained teenage pilots in outdated planes had transformed aerial combat into a largely procedural task, rather than a test of skill or bravery. The Corsair made air warfare an exercise in industrial and technical superiority, rather than a duel of individual heroism. While Japanese aviators adhered to the warrior ethos to the very end, the reality of facing mechanized supremacy rendered their traditional methods tragically ineffective.
The operational history of the F4U Corsair had consequences that extended far beyond immediate battlefield outcomes, profoundly influencing post-war Japanese society. The repeated failures of Japan's aviators to overcome the Corsair highlighted the limitations of relying solely on traditional notions of bravery and spiritual fortitude in modern conflict. The perceived supremacy of the warrior ethos, which had underpinned Japanese militarism for decades, was systematically undermined by the tangible realities of technological and industrial superiority.
In encounters with the Corsair, Japanese pilots were forced to confront the stark reality that individual valor could not counteract engineering excellence or the output of an industrialized nation. For the men of the Imperial Japanese Navy, each engagement with the Corsair served as a personal reckoning. The aircraft's speed, climb rate, firepower, and structural resilience consistently outmatched their own machines and tactics, demonstrating that the technical dimension of war now dominated traditional martial skills. These repeated defeats accumulated into a broader cultural and psychological insight. Japan's military philosophy, centered on spiritual resolve and rigorous training, was fundamentally inadequate against an adversary who had harnessed both scientific innovation and mass production. In effect, every surviving Japanese pilot carried with him a lesson that extended beyond the cockpit. The nation's wartime assumptions were mistaken, its methods obsolete, and its ideology unsustainable when confronted with industrial power on a continental scale. This realization bore a resemblance to earlier historical experiences, such as the encounter of the German Luftwaffe with the industrial capacity of the United States. Japanese aviators, like their German counterparts, entered combat with confidence in their skill and aircraft performance, only to discover that their technical and tactical superiority was dwarfed by the concentrated industrial resources of their opponent. The F4U Corsair was not merely a weapon, it was a tangible manifestation of a civilization's capacity to translate technological advancement into decisive strategic advantage. From a military technical perspective, the Corsair validated a principle increasingly evident in World War II. Success in industrialized warfare depended less on individual heroism than on the ability of a nation to design, manufacture, and deploy superior machinery in sufficient quantities. For Japanese naval aviation, the Corsair was simultaneously assessor, critic, and executioner. It exposed the deficiencies of aircraft design, tactical doctrine, and even the philosophical foundations of Japanese aerial combat training. The progression from initial encounters marked by tactical experimentation to the desperate adoption of kamikaze strategies can be traced directly to the psychological impact of repeated Corsair engagements. Each dogfight eroded confidence, replacing it with recognition of immutable technological and logistical realities. The air war over the Pacific, particularly in the Solomon Islands and the Philippines, revealed that Japan's reliance on courage and skill could not compensate for disparities in aircraft performance and industrial output. The fear experienced by Japanese pilots was neither irrational nor a sign of personal inadequacy. It was an acute awareness of the overwhelming imbalance they faced. Their apprehension represented the rational understanding that their lives were expendable in a contest they could not hope to win through valor alone. In the decades following the war, the Corsair has been preserved and celebrated in air shows around the world, its characteristic engine whine and inverted gull wings serving as a reminder of its performance. Yet, for the veterans of the Pacific theater, the aircraft carries a deeper historical significance. It embodies the harsh lessons of modern conflict, that technological sophistication and production capacity can decisively shape outcomes, that bravery cannot substitute for material advantage, and that an entire military philosophy can be invalidated through sustained operational exposure. Ultimately, the encounters between Japanese pilots and the F4U Corsair contributed to a broader civilizational shift. They demonstrated the limits of a culture rooted in spiritual discipline when facing industrial modernity, and helped catalyze Japan's post-war transition from a militarized empire to a nation focused on economic and technological development. The blood and sacrifice of these aviators were, tragically, the means through which Japan internalized a profound strategic truth. In the era of mechanized warfare, industrial might dictates the battlefield, and courage, while honorable, cannot alone secure victory.